of continued learning as a value is also the closest thing I yet have come to a human Wikipedia. This man has a knowledge bank and a width of knowledge that is beyond what I've ever seen. So if it's anything from magic through to conflict transformation, through to God knows what, through to learnings about this region, about Central America, where he spent a lot of time, he's the man. So Noah will take us forward for this next presentation. Off you go.
Thank you. Hello? Okay, there we go. Thank you, Eric, for that kind introduction. And good morning once again to everyone. We're very lucky to have some very interesting panelists with us today, people who have been long-term friends of CPCS. The focus of our discussion today is on how community-based work can be used to help support mediation, negotiation, and dialogue in practice. So we're really focusing on specific cases and specific learnings from people's experiences, and then we can move that into a discussion to see what we can learn together. So I would like to first introduce, to my left, Mr. Alfredo Lubang. And Mr. Lubang is a Mindanaoan peace advocate. He is the regional representative of the Bangkok-based NGO Nonviolence International Southeast Asia. Fred is also the national coordinator for the Philippine campaign to ban landmines and the Secretary General of the South-South Network for Non-State Armed Group Engagement. He holds a master's degree from our Applied Conflict Transformation Studies program from CPCS and Panyasastra University, Cambodia. He's also an active member of the board of the Global Control Arms Campaign, which successfully negotiated an arms trade treaty at the United Nations in 2013. He also served as a member of the advisory board for the International Campaign to ban landmines, the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the International Action Network on Small Arms, and as the regional council member of the International Peace Bureau. He is taught in many places, including the Rotary Center on Peace and Conflict Studies at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, and at the Graduate School of Human Rights in Mahidol University in Thailand, and at the Graduate School for International Development and Cooperation at Hiroshima University, Japan. He is mostly based in Cotabato City, implementing an agreement between the MILF and the government that was signed in 2010 in Kuala Lumpur to clear the Bangsamoro area of explosive remnants of war. Recently, he has launched 2 social media campaigns, Stop Gun Violence campaign and the Stop Bombing Public Places campaign. Today he will be presenting his work on trust and mechanisms for evaluating and for getting a deeper understanding of trust, especially in post-conflict and transitional situations. Moving down the panel, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Htet, who we also call Marie. She is now the director of PNTK, which works for peace building, development, conflict transformation, and community resilience initiatives in Myanmar. She has over 10 years of experience working across sectors on peace building, civil society strengthening, democracy, women's empowerment, and good governance across state and regions, together with the Norwegian People's Aid and Oxfam, Great Britain, in Myanmar. She is the former director of Swaitaha Social Services, which works for peace and conflict transformation in Myanmar, and has recently finished her master's degree in applied conflict transformation studies with us at CPCS and Panyasastra University. In addition to her directorial role, she is a multidisciplinary peace practitioner. She actively serves as the chairman of the board for gender development initiatives, the steering committee member of Women Can Do It Network, and the master facilitator of Active Citizenship Program, and supporting local initiatives and peace building and conflict transformation in the country. She's going to be talking about some of her research on peace infrastructures, both uncovering existing peace infrastructures in Myanmar and helping to support and imagine new structures for peace. And at our far end of our panel, the Honorable Froilyn Mendoza. She represents the non-Moro indigenous peoples for the government of the Philippines in the Bangsamoro Transition Commission. She's an indigenous woman leader from the southern Philippines in Mindanao. She works as a community organizer with extensive experience in indigenous grassroots women's organizing. She's the co-founder of her organization called the Teterai Lambangian Women's Organization. She previously worked as a spokesperson for the Mindanao Council of Lumed Women, a coalition of 18 major tribal groups of indigenous women in Mindanao, from 2003 to 2007 to advance the agenda of indigenous women in the ongoing Government of the Philippines, MILF peace talks. She went on to become the advocacy specialist of the Institute for Autonomy and Governance, a policy advocacy NGO where she worked as worked on a project for government or for empowerment of indigenous people in the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. For 17 years, she has worked to liberate her tribal women through organizing, development, education, training, and advocacy. And she will be sharing with us some of her reflections and experiences on representing indigenous peoples in these peace work. So first I would like to give the floor to Fred to share us his experiences in building trust.
Thank you, Mr. Oprah Noah. It's really nice to be like in an Oprah conversation mode. Assalamualaikum, Mengalaba, Chumlepsu, magandang hapon, magandang umaga, good morning. Days ago, I was one of the trainers for the Joint Peace and Security Teams. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is a mechanism that the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government agreed that they will create a mechanism that would be like the peacekeeping, akin to a peacekeeping model, wherein there would be joint Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces, Mujahideen, and the army and the police would join together as a team to be the joint peace and security team. In their graduation, days ago, a Mujahid delivered a message on behalf of the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces, said, "We'd like to thank you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the chance to serve. We need to trust each other. Unlike before, only our guns talk to each other." And you will wonder, what does he really refer to the trust that he mentioned? What does he exactly mean? And that is something I would just go back to this case when I refer to my research findings later. How do they really define trust? The next case, as part of the implementation of the peace agreement between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the government, in the year 2010, the panel agreed in Kuala Lumpur that they will clear the areas where they previously battled. We will clear these areas of the explosives we used, the bombs we dropped, and so we have to implement this agreement. It was signed by both parties, witnessed by the facilitator, and my organization, the Philippine Campaign to Ban Landmines, together with the Fondation Suisse de Déménage, or the Swiss Foundation for Mine Action, are mentioned in Annex on Normalization, particularly on Provision E, saying we will implement this agreement. And that is my task, to implement this agreement. And I'll be sharing the case study that I did for this research, referring to this particular work. So what do we really do? We go out to the communities, ask people, do you have bombs? Do you know where they drop the bombs? Do you find any explosive in your community? We go to MLF controlled territory where the military can't even go there. We would ask community, schools, we would have programs for risk education so they would avoid explosives, playing with it, and so forth. In the midst of discussions within the community, then there was this boy who just suddenly said, "Is this what you're looking for?" So you kind of, wait, you should not bring that here. But the point is that I'm making is, what was the basis of trust that this individual would suddenly go to me and said, "Is this what you're looking for?" Because it's part of the we have to explain to them that it was really agreed by the MILF and the government that we really have to clear your areas of explosives, because later on our rehabilitation would go unhampered by all these risks and threat of bombs. The next one, when we do clearing, or what we say, we get the explosive, it's not just us, it's a joint. And you will see a mujahideen and a army personnel involved in the actual operations of being able to destroy explosives in the community. And my point is, what factors really sustain trust? They used to fight each other, but now they're working together. First, the first case that I mentioned, through the joint peace and security teams, now through this mechanism. Third one, during the signing of the framework agreement of the Bangsamoro, which our speakers yesterday mentioned, one particular aspect of the speech of the president said, it is about acknowledging that trust has to be earned. It is about forging a partnership that rests on the bedrock of sincerity, goodwill, and hard work. I'm just using this as a case from a leader's perspective. What does he really also mean with that mention of the concept of trust? And just like Chairman Al-Haj Murad, who mentioned after the Mama Sapano incident, someone already told the story of this incident that happened that killed a number of army, police, special forces, and the mujahideen as well. So a total of around more than 60 were killed. After that, the chairman issued a statement that trust has been affected. Again, you know, it's kind of very, they just speak about trust, but specifically, what factors really diminish trust? And this is the point of my research. So I'll just, another point which I think I've mentioned earlier, this is not about showing you how I look like 20 years ago, but this is actually, I would just like to explain to you why Bangsamoro did not end up like Cambodia, like Laos, like Vietnam, like the borders of Thailand, and also not like Burma. In the mid-1990s, we went to Camp Abu Bakar, and it's also a point that probably not much in the Bangsamoro know. Miriam Coronel Ferrer, the chair of the government peace panel, used to be the national coordinator of the Philippine campaign to ban landmines. In the 90s, we struggled to really engage the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in the days of the war to say that you have to decide not to use landmines in your warfare. And on that note, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, headed then by the late Chairman Hashim Salamat, Halaj Murad was still the military officer, said, we will not use landmines in our warfare because it is against the teachings of Islam. Big decision at that time in the 90s. The government, on the other hand, also committed. President Ramos went to Cambodia. He saw all the victims of landmines here. When he went back to the Philippines in 1998, he ordered the entire stockpile of the Philippine Army of landmines to be destroyed. He was really touched by the stories that he got when he went to Cambodia. So big decisions by the leaders, the government and the armed group. And now we don't have landmines in the Philippines, unlike the countries that I mentioned, that until now, the war has been over for past 20 years, but if you really go into provinces here in Cambodia, you will still hear stories of children stepping on landmines and losing their limbs, their eyes, or their lives. And that is something that I really stress out, that's something to be thankful to the leadership of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the leadership then of the Philippine government, that Bangsamoro did not become like our neighbors who have suffered much from these weapons. Implementing agreements has been really difficult. They said signing an agreement does not really assure you that it would be implemented. That's one. There's a study that compiled all the peace agreements in the world, and they said that conclusion of that study said 50% of the peace agreements signed, only 50% surpassed the 5 years, and the rest, they go back to the cycle of conflict and violence. There was also a study that said it's not really being studied, implementing an agreement. They are more practiced than studied. After years of fighting, the trust issues between the parties is quite very stark because we used to fight each other and now we're implementing an agreement. So the trust issues is very much into that. So I explored from different sides of it, from the individual level to the group level and to the societal level. I just really have to breeze through all this. From the individual level, we really have to study the leadership. And it's like we have to look at the relationship-based perspective between the leaders and the followers and how the followers view that relationship. Second, you have to look at the character-based of the individual. Some people really look at Chairman Al-Haj Murad, a very respectable person. They really respect his views, and all the panel members of the government, of the MILF has been really respected down the line. On the side of the government, there was a question then, you know, a woman chairing the government panel, is it okay? You know, all these kinds of an individual layer of this analysis of trust. Therefore, in this level, on the individual, the limitation is the follower actually the ones giving trust. From the organizational level, there was a study of the balance between trust and task control. In order for the group to have that trust, you have to really control tasks. And since to avoid behaviors that are opportunistic or make use of the situation, you have to install monitoring mechanisms. And this is where I think the international monitoring team, the local monitoring team, ideas so that there will be no people or groups who will take advantage of this kind of setup. There's also a balance between, in the societal level, nuancing of concepts, usually between familiarity, between confidence. Someone mentioned about confidence building measures. It's very close to the concept of trust. But if you look at the confidence, and a writer differentiated between confidence and trust. If you go out of your house and you don't bring your weapon, and then you feel safe, you feel you're in a situation of confidence. You have no options. But if you have an option wherein, should I take the gun or not, or some kind of, for Chairman Al-Haj Murad before then, should we use landmines or not, you know, these kinds of options. Later on, if the situation would not be favorable, like something happened, the blame would be much on the individual, on you, because you decided. Rather than on a confidence wherein you could blame external factor and not your control. You would say it's the fate, you know, that's why it happened. On some of the theoretical framework, I'll just go through, because it's a mix of some of your academics might be interested, but it's really a kind of, there are bases of trust, and there's trustful expectations, like favorable expectations. You didn't trust people, you didn't trust institutions, but there was a kind of weak linkage, and some of the thinkers said it's a kind of fate, and therefore, if it's a kind of fate, you have to suspend it and then leap. You have to leap towards that. And for my study, I tried to examine what are those bases of trust so that you can make that leap. For Chairman Iqbal, the chair of the panel, the negotiating panel of the MILF, said when they were negotiating, we don't have really control who the government panel is. It's not an issue of trust. We have no choice. They gave us this panel on the other side, so we have no choice. But implementing an agreement, the trust issue comes into place. For chairperson, Chair Miriam Ferrer, her statement is more of, we have to strengthen institutions because we used to fight each other, therefore they have to follow the rules, the mechanisms in place, so that trust will then be defined through time. Both of them agreed that it takes time and to build those trust bases. So going directly to my definition, trust is a reflexive process of building on reason, routine, reflexibility, suspending irreducible social vulnerability and uncertainty. I'm just using a motoring spring just for people who are interested in the concept, but I would go directly to the findings for the lack of time. So if you really want trust to be there, there were three factors that really came out on my study. I used quantitative approach mixed with qualitative approach. I used two communities in the Bangsamoro. One is both of them affected by war. The other one, a peace agreement is already being implemented on our side. On the other side, the other village, peace agreement wasn't implemented. So it really came out that to have trust in implementing peace accords, you really have to be transparent. Transparency came out strong. Open communication. There's that communication really going on between the parties and all stakeholders involved. To have those at the individual level, that's a time they can leap of faith, as they said. Because at the individual level, they would see how transparent you can be or how you communicate the concerns, the challenges. And I think the Mama Sapano incident that I mentioned, at the individual level, they all failed. They never informed that they will do this operation. They were not transparent, and therefore Murad's statement earlier that the trust is being affected is indeed valid, because the factors that I've mentioned actually are so the key, transparency and open communication. Of course, when the individual goes into the group, he broadens his trust to the group, and therefore there will be more factors. Transparency, reliable leadership. Reliable leadership entails integrity. The chair of the panel of the government, Miriam Ferrer, said it really hinged on the integrity of the other, because and how he holds the process. What if he dies? What if people change? Another one takes over, and then he loses hold of that control on the followers. That is crucial in implementing peace agreement. Commitment to a higher vision. It's quite clear from the MILF side that they have a higher vision of being able to achieve that right to self-determination. There's a higher goal that they have that sense. On the other side, maybe vision of the President of the Philippines to have a safer Bangsamoro that would contribute to a larger peaceful Philippines is there. From an intergroup dynamics, the whole transparency, open communication, implementation of what was agreed, and reliable leadership still got into the main factors in my study. If you look at factors that sustain, it was interesting to have conversations with the Mujahideen saying, you know what, we could feel sincerity. I don't know if this is the whole Asian thing. They know when they are lied. They know when the other is just, BSing them. They would feel the sincerity of that person. And I think it's akin to that prolonged engagement. When you engage them for years and years, and you become consistent on your engagement, sincerity really plays up. They would really see that sincerity. And you would notice for several years we've been going to Camp Abu Bakar, engaging them consistently for the past 20 years. What could be more sincere for peace advocates to do that? In the factors that diminish trust, I will just go skip maybe later on some questions. The insincerity plays up so much, and it's interesting how they would really pinpoint the factor of insincerity. You speak, but your actions does not match what you speak. Doubt. It's difficult that in the first instant, you've not even implemented the agreement, you're already being doubted. You can't do that. The Bangsamoro people cannot manage themselves. How can you trust that kind of other when you are already doubted on your skills, on your capacity, and all the things? That really does not play up well in terms of trust. Disrespect. There are many issues of disrespect, particularly cultural norms. Being insensitive to the practices of Islam plays up much. But again, not fulfilling your obligation is something that really is high. If the government of the Philippines cannot commit, cannot move forward to the Bangsamoro Basic Law, because that is their obligation as part of the government, then I'm sure, based on my study, the trust on the process, or the trust of the government would be affected. I don't have, if I still have 2 minutes. It's just more of visualizing the whole point that I'm making. It's really a reflexive process. When you experience it, you process it within your mind, saying, oh, I have a good positive outcome. I went to Cotabato City. I heard before that there were a lot of bombings, but when you go there, nothing happened. And so you have this feeling of positivity. The outcome is good. You go back to Manila or go back to Siem Reap, and you feel like, you tell your friends, you know what, it's safe in Cotabato. Nothing really happened to you. So, and then it becomes consistent. You reflect on it, and then furthermore, you trust then going to Cotabato. The problem is, the following day, a bomb just, a grenade was just thrown in the public market in somewhere, and then you feel again, so this whole cycle of from the individual trustful state would then have that reflexive process in the run. I would go through some of the conclusions, but I've already mentioned some, but I would just really go through some of the recommendations. Because transparency really rated high, we really want the Bangsamoro Basic Law to contain a freedom of information. And this is an aspect, I think, that is not in the Bangsamoro Basic Law, but there were assurances that once the Bangsamoro will be able to govern, there will be provisions, legislation, or local legislation that would allow freedom of information. This would really hit on, if you want your people, the Bangsamoro people, to trust the leadership, you really have to open up, be transparent. And I think this is the challenge of the leadership. There should be that mechanism, even within the more Islamic Liberation Front. How transparent would you really be when the transition would be happening? And that mechanism should be in place within the group. Even if they transition into another political party, transparency and open communication would really be in place. I had a number of recommendations, and it's really a problematic because elections will be next year, presidential elections will be next year. If the Bangsamoro trust President Aquino, the current president, what if there would be another president next year that is against the Bangsamoro-based law or entirely against the will of the Bangsamoro? That would create a problem in terms of trust build. So guarantees should be there that despite of changing leadership, you have to implement what you have agreed. Because we did not negotiate, the panels did not negotiate with a person, it was negotiating with the Philippine government. Therefore, obligations for the next leadership should really be, they have to implement that agreement. So, in terms of implementing TORs, because Professor Abud mentioned so many agreements, TORs, MOUs, all these implementing guidelines should really have provisions after, and I challenge all those who are implementing agreements, try to put provisions on transparency and open communication, because it really builds trust based on my study. For the community, they really have to engage institutions. It's really strengthening institutions. It's better to trust institutions because it's more durable than, of course, the individual would be there as a platform. But again, we really need to trust institutions and hopefully stronger institutions like the future Bangsamoro. With that, I think we know the time limitation, but by the way, my study also applies to personal relationships. So if you are into the case of personal relationships, it really works well. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. In our work, it's very easy to say that we should place an importance on trust and trust building, but it's much harder to look at it in a very systematic way. And I really appreciate the way that you combined a very methodological approach with still acknowledging that at some point you need to take the leap of faith. So next, I would like to invite Marie to speak on peace infrastructure and her research on peace infrastructure in Myanmar.
Good morning. It's my honor to be here and present about my research is in a very, I would say, in a very beginning stage of what really peace infrastructure is in Southern Shan State. However, I would, I'm really glad that I could share some of the progress right now with you all. So my research is looking at exploring peace infrastructure in southern Shan State. So I like to introduce where Shan State is first to you. So Shan State is situated in the eastern part of our country. And also it is the largest state among the 14 states and region of the country. And it is bordering with China, Laos, Thailand. And also it is connecting with 5 administrative states and region of the country. So in terms of geopolitical aspect and social way of looking at this area, it is very critical area of the country. And also in terms of looking at the composition of people and population living in there, it has a mix of ethnic groups, although it says Shan State, but it's not only Shan ethnic groups living in the area. It has a mix of community, and also it has a mix of religious beliefs. So you will see in the area like Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, even Sikh is there. So we have a mix of religious group is also situated in Shan State. And also if we look at geographical landscape, you will also see a different landscape, the hilly places, the lowland and the lake. And most of you who've been to Myanmar, who already travel a lot in Shan State, you will notice the beautiful lake, Inle Lake there. So my action research is focusing more on the southern Shan State because if I have to introduce again, Shan State, as I have been explained just now, it is a kind of like microcosm of Myanmar. You will see the development there, you will see different people there, you will see different faith, belief, and understanding, and also you will see a different diversity. And so for my research, I try to look at like southern Shan State, because in Shan State is divided into 3, which is northern Shan State, eastern Shan State, and southern Shan State. And southern Shan State, the fighting in southern Shan State just ended up in 2012 with the Southern Shan State Army South and the current government. And also in the new signing, they are also included. So what I like to say here is the condition of peace, the ceasefire, is very recent. So it's still a long process to build peace in the area and helping each other in this process of living peacefully. And also, I see that as part of this conflict context is people in the area, when they hear about the word peace, they're quite reluctant to use the word peace or say themselves like they're working for peace, because the word peace itself has been used and misused several times as part of the revolutionary movement, which is in a touch with violent act. So community people, when they are hearing about we want to work for peace, and they are quite reluctant. They don't want to be involved because they imagine in a touch with this violent act happening in their area. And also the majority of people see like, yes, we need peace. So when I ask about, okay, what kind of peace building you want, then most of them coming in like, we need ceasefire, we need monitoring, we need a kind of justice system in our place. So justice system is in a way is very good, but what I see in majority is they see like this negative peace building. What I would say is the absence of war, the absence of physical violence is the only solution or is the only answer to their peace. So when we are meeting with different other organizations who is working on gender-based violence or transitional justice or legal and law enforcement, when I met with them, they said, no, we don't work for peace. We're working for this. So I said, why you say yourself that you are not working for peace? They said, no, peace is something different. Peace is related to ceasefire agreement. Peace is related to something that we're working for gender-based violence. We're working for law enforcement. So the way how people connect the definition of peace is still different in the area. And also, this is the map of Southern Shan State. So if you look at the map itself of Southern Shan State, you will see different composition and also different allocation of arms group, military, and also different self-administration areas in Southern Shan State. So what I would like to explain you here is the society, which is influenced a lot by this militarized situation and militarized environment. And that's why majority of institution and organization activities in Shan State, they are also focusing more on like short-term, like what would be our short-term solution for peace? Let's do something, come up with short-term. It's in a way very good, but also if we look at the peace infrastructure framework for the sustainable perspective, we also need long-term solution and long-term activities that is addressing for sustainable peace. So in terms of those, we hardly seen those peace-building initiatives are situated in Shan State. And also the presence of arms group and Myanmar military and the availabilities of weapons around Shan State, it's also created to feel themselves it is a kind of militarized society, or a kind like the education in the area is also a kind like militarized education. It's more like some of the violent acts are legitimized to use in a way to find solution for peace. So that kind of teachings are still happening and playing an important role in the area. So for that, I'm looking at with three objectives. I'm trying to, within a short period of this year, I try to find out three answers in Southern Shan State, which is to find out whether there is peace infrastructure in Southern Shan State. Based on this conflict context, I'm really curious to know. And also, besides that, is I've been working in Southern Shan State since 2005. I've been in and out and have opportunities to meet with different organizations, civil society, and religious institutions and groups. And I have a chance to getting to know and build relationship with them. And I hear different story and different narratives from different groups. But, and also we see like, yes, Shan State, although there is no current violence happening in Southern Shan State particularly, but the potential driver of conflict in Shan State is very high. And also if something happened in South Shan State, that would be the biggest violent compared to the rest of the country conflict. So I'm really curious about how this area is helping and setting up their own infrastructure, and whether they have existing peace infrastructure or not. And also to identify what kind of peace infrastructure is necessary to build there if there is no peace infrastructure in place. And also to find out what kind of peace-related skills or knowledges are needed or already existed in Shan State. So from this aspect, I try to meet with different people, different civil society organizations. So in number, I met with 111 individual people from different compositions of field, which is from CBOs, local NGO, is also from youth groups, women groups, and also some government staff who are working in administration, who are working in different others activities, government offices, and also met with some religious leaders and just followers also. And also I try to meet and discuss and interview with some individual people who are just normal teachers, farmers, ordinary people. So from this discussion and interviewing and meeting with them, I come with like this. Getting to know some of this finding I'm about to share you here. So I also like to share some stories when I'm conducting this action research, because in the beginning of my action research, I went back to Shan State and tried to meet with all, like the first contact point of me, because I work from civil society side, so I tried to meet with different civil society organizations operating in Shan State. And I had this formal meeting with different institutions and gone through the discussion. And then they discuss, they find out, and then we finish. And then I go back to my hotel. I stay at home, stay at the hotel and the guest house. And I receive a lot of phone calls from them after. Although I met with them already, although I had a lot of discussion with them, can I have, can I come to your place? Can I have some time to discuss with you? They are from same organization, but they individually called me and said, can I meet with you again? Because I like to continue the discussions. So I said, okay, then I also want to know whether you want to call your colleagues, this person and that person. He said, no, I want to come alone. Each of them respond to me in that way. And I was curious, why? Because I already have meeting with them. Anyway, I try to allocate time together and then sit down again with them. And then they give me a different narrative, which is not coming out from the formal meeting, although they are from just the same community-based organization. And I found out that even one civil society organization who have the same drive, who have the same space to work together, they have different ways of seeing things, and the level of trust is still limited. Because to me, I see them like they are one mission, one drive, but they still have, he said, one of the guys says to me that, I ask, why don't you tell me when we are in discussions? And he said, you know, in our organization, majority are Po'o, and I belongs to Shan. So if I express something about Po'o or Shan, then the majority of Po'o will be against with me. And I don't want this to happen because I want to maintain my relationship within the organization. So even the organization within itself has a lot of challenges and the level of trust operating in the area. And so when I'm gone through this action research, it's more on reflective-based learning and trying to adapt and integrate it into a new planning, and we've gone through this action research reflective methodology. And I found out that the existence of peace infrastructure is still very hard to notice. And also, oh, interesting, why this, okay. And also, wherever the situation is, but in terms of the group or field, civil society are still being recognized as one of the source and one of the center of peace infrastructure. So when international or outsiders coming in, they go to civil society organization first, and then they try to explore like what existing. I think it's also a good way to learn and meet with them and have dialogue and discussions with them so that they could assess for the culture and the practices of peace in the area. And also we see that in the community, in terms of peace infrastructure, religious institutions and leaders are still playing the symbol for peace. However, with the recent so-called religious violence happening across the country, the religious leader and institution are also not a good example right now, because they have to hide their role. Some of them, although they are currently doing a lot of interfaith activities, but they don't want to know themselves that they are helping for this process. So a lot of political issues are linking in there right now. So it's also hard to say this is the symbol for peace. And also some of the local patterns and system of peaceful resolution is being transformed and hidden by political discourse. What I'm trying to say is, I've been to, when I was in Shan State around 2005, 6, 7, I frequently visited the villages. And at that time, they are so-called brown area and black area. Those areas are. So in those villages, what kind of conflict resolution practices had is they don't go to those administration mechanism. They don't approach to them because it is a kind of difficult for them to approach. So what they set up is they have their own community elected elders who being trusted so well, and they are the one who they used to approach, and whatever the community have problems or conflict or crime happen, they go to those people and try to get answer and for their resolution of conflict. And one of the structure in that time is there are also some cross-boundary problem, like from one village to another, from one community to another, and then they don't solve that problem quite, they don't solve the problem at once. They hold it, they try to console the community, and they try to have this village track meeting where those elders from other community are also gathering every quarter. And in every quarter they met, and also when they are in a meeting, it's transparent meeting where the rest of the villager, whoever want to come and listen, what are they discussing, they can come and listen. And they listen, and they call this community in front of the whole community. Sometimes it's 100 community gathering, sometimes it's almost 500 and 1,000, depending on how big or small the case is. And then they gather, they listen, and they vote. And then they resolve the conflict in that way. So it's very beautiful for me to see an evidence of this way of resolution in every quarter in that village. However, when this new political discourse, what I mean is new ceasefire agreement come in 2012, and after that, they want to place their new administrative government in the area. So the new government, the new self-administrative government, tried to put one person in charge of that community. But this person is not being legitimized or not being trusted by the community. Then the power levels start. And the life has been threatened, those leaders. So they have to find other ways so that they can resolve the conflict and still help. So I would be happy to share that story of how it's being transformed in later stage for the time-wise, sorry. And also, in terms of systematic pattern, it's still difficult to say whether its systematic pattern existed in there or not, because in our country, the transition has been influenced a lot. So according to the transition of our country direction, some of the peace infrastructure are also moving and transforming from one system to another. And also collaborative effort and networking activities are still very limited. So if still have time, I like to share one more story. It is in one village tract, I would say, a big village tract, where they have problem of resource scarcity. The whole village tract, they don't have water resource. But one village in that whole community has the source for water. So what the leaders trying to say and trying to resolve that issue is setting up a system in the village and trying to distribute water to the rest of the area. But the discussion was not held very inclusively or very satisfactorily. You know, they're not, the community where the resource existed, they are not satisfied with the answer. But they dare not want to respond or against with their leader. So with those leader who has been in place administratively powerful. So what they do is, instead of talking back or against to those leader, they kill snakes. What they do, because why they do it is they kill snake, and then they put those dead snake into the different pipe where it's distributing to the rest of the villages. And when these snakes die, it's blocked, and also the water not good. But they can also give excuse that this is just snake going into those thing. We're not doing it. They're just going in and die. So they found another creative way to save their resources. But what I see in the community is the level of trust and the level and the space for discussion and dialogue, and for them to have space to take time and find out the real answer that can satisfy and understand about the situation. Because the experts come in, the experts who know how the water resource is and whether it can distribute or not, they confirm, they know that this water resource is very good and it can distribute the rest of the villages very well. It will not stop or it will not gone. But they cannot explain well, and the dialogue space or the discussion went well, does not went well. So that's how it happened. And still, a lot of debate, fighting is still happening in those areas. So I would say those official administrative mechanisms are still not working very well. So only when they are facing like the real crime situation, they went there and approach. If not, the communities, they want to resolve their conflict by their own ways, by their own creative means, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but it's still happening in the area. And also, I would say the lack of stable, peaceful condition in the community is also a great burden for the community. So anytime the fighting in the rest of the area can influence to their area. So some kind of peace infrastructure to be built there. I would like to highlight some of the point. We still need to promote more peace infrastructure. It is, for example, like promoting more dialogue discussion, to promote more trusted and safe places for which can raise their voice more openly, and also for them to exchange local practices, because some of the existing infrastructure has been suppressed. So whether we should recognize them back or whether we should encourage those into it, and also to create more horizontal platform and discussions, and also to strengthen legal foundation and structural mechanism, and also to provide vertical engagement, because now we have the system of parliament. So whether people can use the system with newly established, which is the representative government, the representative of the community, whether they can use this part of their infrastructure for peace. That also has been recognized a lot in the building of peace infrastructure in Shan State, and also to provide more peace building, because the understanding of peace in Shan State also different from one community to another. It's also find out a lot. And mostly they also address, we don't know, what do you mean by peace in your community? What do we mean by peace? And what is your solution of peace? Whether it is a solution with a gun, or is a solution with, whether it is a solution of a dialogue, or whether it is a solution of electing our representative, how is it? And also, like almost 22%, more than 22% of the community, they raise a lot about governance issue. They raise a lot about rule of law, the current existing corruption issues happening a lot in the area. So, sorry. So this is not an end in itself, and it is a long way to go, and we are in the beginning of this journey. And the peace infrastructure, to me, it can be any infrastructure. It could be established from the community level, or it can be initiated from the top level. However, it is a way that could empower the resources for reconciliation, and also that could help the best practices and exchange the best practices of nonviolence from one community to another. And so that, and also to have the inclusiveness of stakeholders in the discussions and in creating peace solution in their society. So I hope that this will be something helpful, and I will be happy to share more later.
Thank you, Marie, for sharing your research and analysis of assessing where we are and the structures that we need to support going forward into the future. And last but not least, I would like to invite the Honorable Froilyn Mendoza to give her reflections on her experiences. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here in this Peace Practitioners Conference here in Siem Reap. It is my honor to speak in front of you and to present also, especially my experience as a lone woman representative of Indigenous people in the Bangsamoro Transition Commission. The Bangsamoro Transition Commission is one of the roadmap that has agreed upon by the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And the main task of the commission was first to draft the Bangsamoro Basic Law, second to conduct consultations to all the stakeholders that will be affected by this new political entity, and then thirdly to recommend the development project. And another task is to recommend to Congress and Senate if there are things that might be hurdle for the passing of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. For example, a recommendation about the constitutional amendment. So I think that is one of the 4 tasks that was tasked to us as one of the 15th member of the Bangsamoro Basic Law that draft that law. Just to begin, about an overview of who are these non-Moro indigenous people. And this one. Okay. So, if you see in southern Philippines, particularly in what we call at the moment the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, in the mainland ARMM, in Maguindanao, for example, there is the Duray, so that's where I belong, that's my tribe. The Lambanian, the Dulangan, Manobo, and the Blaan. And another province in Wao, we have the Tiguhanon, the Batanes, Matigsalog, Talaandig, Kalagan, Ilianan, Manobo, Subanan, Higaunan, Umayamnon, and Badjao. And of the latest cultural mapping that my organization has been conducted, we comprise of, I think, 122,000 households in population. So if the population of the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao is in 4 to 6 million, I think we are about 1.9%. So we are a minority within a majority. Yeah, I would just like to say something also about this photo. This photo is considered as one of the ancestral domain area of my tribe. And this area has been in conflict also for the last 40 years. And if you can see, there is also a camp. They are established by the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which is Camp Omar, and the other side of the hill, the Camp Bader. And this area is a traditional area of the Indigenous Duray tribe, and one of the important legendary spot that I can share with you is about this Mount Firis. So that Mount Firis is very historical to us because this is where our legendary leader, Lagay Firis, we believe, ascend to heaven without dying. And also this is the very reason why the non-Moro indigenous people, even though this area has been in conflict, has been in war, we cannot leave this place because of that historical importance to us as indigenous people. In the negotiation with the government and the MILF, I know this is one of the hurdles, the issue of identity and ancestral domain. And actually this is one of the tough issues that the government and the MILF cannot move on. But for us as indigenous people, we assert that our distinct identity as indigenous people must be respected and must be clarified in the agreement between the government and the MILF, and also the issue of ancestral domain. This has been so immovable when these two important issues has been discussed. in the series of negotiation that took place in Malaysia. And of course, our self-governance and justice system. I think these are very important for us as indigenous peoples, that our tribal governance and justice system, which form part of our customary law, must be put in place and must be part of the talking points between the government and the MILF. Because if you will take that out from us, then what is the meaning for us being an indigenous people? So you will take that one to us, and these are the very reason why we were called indigenous people and why we survive as a people. Of course, I may say that there are indigenous people already sitting, for example, in the different mechanism, or who are part of the technical member of the technical working group. But the problem usually is because we are not in the formal, because the ones who are talking, it's bilateral, the government and the MILF. So usually when we submit our prepositions document or submission, sometimes it is being considered as informal documents. So that's the very reason why. And I think I must also say that this is the very reason why my tribe has been pushed me as the representative to the Bangsamoro Transition Commission. For me to be in this position was very hard. It was very stressful because I have to consider three things very important. First, the issue of the indigenous people, some are non-negotiable. I have said already the issue of ancestral domain and the issue of identity. And we know for a fact that this has never been part also of the talking points. Secondly, there is this law that already recognizes our rights as indigenous peoples, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or the IPRA. So in the Philippine context, this is the expression of what the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is all about. So if it's in the Philippine setting, that's the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. But if you will try to look at it in the context of the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, we haven't feel the implementation of these laws. And I think this is also one part of the chunks that has never been talked about in the formal peace process. So I said it was very stressful for me. Secondly, when they considered me to be the representative in the Bangsamoro Transition Commission, it was very hard for me at the time because I am also running a grassroots women's organization, and I am the key person in that organization. And this another job is too tough for me to do. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I think is that the indigenous people said, the indigenous peoples that I am representing say, it's okay if you will be loose in the votings, or the important thing is you will able to raise our issues and concerns. So that was, they said. And I also had made clear to them that it doesn't mean that when I am in this representation, then all your concerns will be carried on. We have to remember that there is a mechanism, there is the internal rules, for example, on issues that the Commission cannot come up with a consensus, and there is this voting. So, since I am the only one who is standing for our rights in the Commission, so I clearly tell them that this is how it looks like, just so that my people will not expect so much to me, which I cannot deliver. So I was then frank to them at the time. And I think one of the challenges also was that how will I explain it to the MILF and to government to convince them that this is what I want, this is what my people want. So it's not an easy task. For 1 year and 3 months that we crafted the Bangsamoro Basic Law, there are a lot of hurdles. But what keep me going is that the aspiration of my people that hasten, I think, the burden that they carry in my back. So I think that's one of the things, and the trust also of the people, and of course the transparency also that I told them I am not a politician. I came from a grassroots women's organization, so I cannot promise anything about this under the sun, that I can carry on all our voices. So I think that's the one thing that only holds me back to proceed to the task that was given to me. Of course, aside from the hurdles that I have been going through, especially in the crafting of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, is we are also confronted with many things, especially for Indigenous women. And then the distances, for example, of how they will participate in the discussions, in the meetings. So, because they said, how can we participate in the discussion on the issues that it's only the important people are the ones who are always invited. So for us who are ordinary, like the Indigenous women who never hold positions, for example, so we're not invited or we're not included. So how we will know it? Next is they are also confronted with this economic marginalization, their impoverished situation. So before I can tell them about the Bangsamoro Basic Law, the ongoing peace process, but they also have particular necessities. They also have issues to confront with. So they have to do hard labor every day to go to farm, to work, to survive. So they are confronted with this. So for them, the peace process and the Bangsamoro Basic Law is second priority. What is priority for them is their survival. So it was very hard also for this and how to reach them out. However, I, together with the other civil society organization, were relentless in our objective, and that is for the common good of the Indigenous people and for the Bangsamoro. So little by little, we have seen the gains of our effort in reaching out and talking to them and giving them the confidence in articulating what they want the peace process to resolve. And they also expressed that if only given an opportunity, they can also be proven to be effective mediators. For example, in the Indigenous community, the traditional roles of that has been part of the customary system. We have this what we call the Libun Kafaduan, and they are the one who settles conflict, so they can be an effective force in mediating and settling conflict. And of course, we also have this Libun Blian. These are the spiritual leader who usually do healing mechanism, and they can also be an effective force also. And of course, the traditional birth attendant who usually perform and attending to the difficult situation of women in giving birth. And for them, they said, if they'll be given a platform, a venue where they can discuss their issues and concern, and they can pretty well help also in the settlement of the conflict, and they said this will be their contribution, for example, not just in the formal peace processes, but mostly in the informal peace processes, like the community activity that they are doing. And also, I would like to clarify also in this conference that it saddens me when our articulation and our assertion of a right is dismissed as the result of the brooding and instigation. This is utterly unfair and extremely insulting to the capacities and wisdoms of my people and our great ancestors, because there has been an issue also about when we try to assert for our identity and our ancestral domain, and specifically if we try to say about the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, and automatically there is already that category of saying, oh, they are anti-BBL. So I would just like to emphasize that one, that what the Indigenous people want is that the rights must be recognized under existing national and international law, like the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. And they also wanted to uphold it and not be diminished, because we also believe that the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act is the fruit of the struggle of the Indigenous people, maybe not in armed struggle, but through constitutional means. And I would also say that unity and identity are two separate issues. Identity is an inherent right of the Indigenous people, so it does not cancel support to the peace talk and the Bangsamoro. I would also say that our identity are intricately connected to our ancestral domain, because it defines us as Indigenous people. It is here where we practice and celebrate our beliefs and customs that we inherited from ancestors based on our customary law. So if you will diminish that, then we will die. Based on my understanding, the Bangsamoro is part of the Philippine states. As such, it will govern the many different people within its territory. The non-Moro indigenous people have a distinct identity and different needs. As such, it is the obligation of the Bangsamoro under existing international declaration and treaties to recognize, protect, and promotes the rights of indigenous people. Unity in diversity is very important, and the proposal that must be reflected in the provision of the basic law must be given with identity. It is very important that there is a promise to maintain the richness of culture and tradition, and how to preserve the country as a platform of inclusivity of the different groups of people in the Bangsamoro. We need a basic law that is transparent and inclusive. We need a law that truly reflects the true sentiments of the different groups of people in the Bangsamoro. Finally, we are not also happy about the state of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, which was written in blood and in tears, while both houses of chamber cannibalize and introduce a substitute bill and derogate the fundamental rights to self-determination of our Moro brother as an answer to the long-tail Moro rebellion in the South. So I think this ends my presentation, and I welcome any clarificatory after this. Pio Bagi Muyag, peace be upon us.
Thank you, Froilyn, for sharing your analysis and your personal reflections on the challenges it takes to represent the hopes and dreams of a people, and the challenge of the one to speak for the many. I'm sure there are many questions from the audience, but I think I will defer to our MC at this moment if we should go for a coffee break. Yes.
Yes, so we have coffee ready for you, and we'll come back for Q&A after coffee break. So coffee is just outside the door where we had our last coffee break this afternoon, and if we can see you back here at 11 o'clock.
Thank you.